Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at Numbers chapter 3,
All right.
and we're going to be really looking into the Levites and their place in the Israelite community.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we've looked at the Exodus from Egypt,
Right.
the journey through the wilderness, the giving of the law at Mount Sinai.
Yep.
And now we're kind of getting into like the nitty-gritty of how this community was structured
Absolutely.
and organized.
That's right.
And what's interesting is that it's not just about the spiritual side of things.
Right.
We're
So
actually
pretty practical.
seeing like the logistics
Yeah.
of how they managed to survive and
Thrive.
thrive
With the blueprint almost.
in this challenging environment.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so fascinating to me about this chapter is that it's not just about faith. It's about
Yeah.
the very practical challenges of keeping a community together when you're, constantly on the move
Yeah.
in a very harsh environment.
And I think one of the first things that we see is with Aaron and his sons, right? So we have Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar.
Right.
So these are kind of the next generation of priests that are going to be,
Yeah, the heirs apparent, if you will.
that's a good way to put it, yeah.
Right.
But I think their story is really interesting because it reminds us that even within a system that's very much built on faith, actions have consequences.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And, Nadab and Abihu tragically meet a tragic end because they stray from some very specific instructions about how certain rituals are to be performed.
It's almost like it sets the stage for like the rest of the chapter.
Exactly.
Being like, listen, even those who are closest to the leadership are not exempt from the rules.
Yeah.
Right. And there's this real emphasis on obedience and on,
Right.
the weight of following those divine instructions.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no room for, kind of like winging it.
Right.
It's like you've got to do it exactly as it's been laid out.
It's serious business.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, beyond that, I think we get to the real heart of the chapter, which is God's selection of the Levites.
Right. And that's where this whole idea of redemption comes into play, right?
Yes.
Because God essentially chooses the Levites to serve in place of all the firstborn sons of Israel.
Yes. So they're kind of standing in as representatives.
So it's almost like they're redeeming the firstborn by taking on this dedicated role.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Right.
So, instead of having every firstborn family having to dedicate their eldest to religious service, the Levites represent them all.
Right. So it's like a consolidation
Yeah, exactly.
of that responsibility.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting too is that it's not just a human decision, right?
Right.
This selection comes directly from God.
Exactly. It's a direct command.
And that really highlights how central they were to the entire Israelite community's relationship with God.
Exactly.
Right? They weren't just helpers.
Yeah, they were entrusted with maintaining that connection.
They were the ones entrusted with maintaining that connection with God.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics a little bit because their responsibilities were pretty far-reaching, right?
Yeah, they had a big job.
What exactly did they do?
Well, you can think of them as the caretakers of the tabernacle, which was the most sacred space
Right.
for the Israelites.
It's a portable sanctuary.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And so keeping it ready for worship, that was a huge responsibility.
Right, it's like a mobile command center
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a good way to think about it.
of faith.
Exactly.
Right.
And they were also assisting Aaron and his sons. Those priests that we were just talking about.
Right, so they're like a support system for the core religious leadership.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And it's also important to note that they served the entire Israelite community,
Right,
not just the priests.
not just the elite.
Yeah, it was the entire community. So they were facilitating the spiritual and ritual side of life for everyone.
Right, they were ensuring that everything ran smoothly for everyone.
Exactly.
And the text doesn't mince words. Unauthorized access to the sanctuary was punishable by death.
Yeah, they took their job very seriously.
This was serious stuff.
Absolutely.
So you have these Levites with this enormous responsibility, but it wasn't just a big free-for-all, right?
No.
They were organized.
Yes, very organized.
They were divided into family groups with specific jobs.
Exactly. So we have the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and the Merarites.
Okay, and each one of those is descended from a different son of Levi.
That's right. Yeah, so we see this kind of like lineage playing out again.
Right.
In terms of who's responsible for what.
And their tasks were tied to that lineage.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like a well-oiled machine
Uh-huh.
with specialized parts,
Right.
ensuring everything runs smoothly.
Yeah. So, for example, you have the Gershonites.
And they were responsible for the tabernacle coverings and the hangings.
Oh, so like the soft furnishings.
Yeah. The textiles, basically.
Okay.
Then you have the Kohathites.
Right.
And they were entrusted with the most sacred objects.
Oh, wow. So they had the big responsibility.
Yeah, like the big responsibility.
Okay.
So we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant,
Okay.
the table, the candlestick, the altars.
Wow.
Like all of the really, really holy items that symbolize God's presence.
It's like, imagine the weight of responsibility handling items like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about objects that represent the divine.
Right.
So, yeah, it was a big deal.
Okay, so we've got the soft furnishings with the Gershonites, we've got the sacred objects with the Kohathites, and then to round things out, what do the Merarites have?
Well, the Merarites, they were the ones responsible for the structural elements of the tabernacle.
Oh, so like the heavy lifters.
Yeah, exactly. So they were the ones dealing with the boards, the bars, the pillars,
Okay.
all the heavy stuff. The builders, essentially.
Yeah, basically the construction crew.
Right, making sure that this portable sanctuary actually holds together.
Exactly.
It's brilliant when you think about it.
Yeah.
Their location was directly tied to what they did, making everything incredibly efficient.
Uh-huh.
You know, and it wasn't just like a flat hierarchy either.
Right.
Right.
So, we were talking about Elias, one of Aaron's sons, who survived that incident.
Right, right.
Well, he was appointed as the chief over all the Levites.
So he was like the manager?
Yeah, he was the manager. He was the one making sure everything ran smoothly, everyone was doing their job properly.
Wow, that's a huge responsibility.
It was.
Especially considering how central the Levites were to the entire community.
Yeah, he needed some serious organizational skills.
And leadership skills.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right, because it wasn't just about like,
yeah,
ticking boxes and...
It was about the spiritual side of things, too.
Right, it was about ensuring that the spiritual well-being of the community was maintained.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and go back to this redemption process for the extra firstborn sons.
Okay.
Because we know that there weren't enough Levites to represent every single firstborn.
Yeah.
So they had to make up for that somehow.
Right, it's like balancing the books almost.
Right, right. And you mentioned that they had to compensate with a payment of 5 shekels for each extra firstborn son.
That's right.
Can you break that down for us, like how that actually worked?
Sure. So we know that there were 22,273 firstborn Israelite males.
Okay.
And 22,000 Levites.
Right.
So that leaves us with 273 firstborn sons who need to be accounted for.
Okay.
So for each of those extra sons, a payment of 5 shekels was made.
So it's about maintaining that balance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Acknowledging the value of those firstborn.
Right, because they're still important even though there isn't a Levite to directly represent them.
Exactly.
Okay. And where did that redemption money go?
Well, it went to Aaron and his sons. Yeah, so it's interesting because this detail, again, reinforces their leadership role and connects the priesthood directly to this concept of redemption.
Right.
So everything's kind of intertwined.
Yeah, it's like they're building this really complex picture of their religious and social structure.
It's all connected.
Right, and we can't forget that this wasn't just some random system that someone came up with.
Right.
This was divinely ordained.
It was ordained by God.
Right. God specifically chose the Levites.
Uh-huh.
And that emphasizes that these responsibilities weren't just tasks. They were sacred duties.
They were holy obligations.
Right. So everything they did was an act of service to God.
Exactly.
And that brings us to another really fascinating aspect of this chapter, which is the layout of the entire Israelite camp.
Oh, yeah.
We've been focusing on the Levites,
Uh-huh.
but they were just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
One part of a larger whole.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're zooming out now to see how the rest of the tribes fit into this grand campsite design.
Absolutely. So picture the tabernacle right in the center, representing the presence of God.
Okay.
Surrounded by the Levites.
Okay.
And then radiating outward from that central point, you have the 12 tribes of Israel.
Okay, so I'm imagining something like a compass rose.
Yeah.
Right, with each tribe occupying a point on the compass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to visualize it.
So how's it all laid out?
Well, the east was considered the most important direction.
Okay.
So that position was occupied by the tribes of Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun.
Okay. And those tribes were known for their strength and their leadership.
Exactly. So they were symbolically leading the way as the Israelites journeyed through the wilderness.
Oh, so they were like the vanguard.
Yeah, like the vanguard of the entire community.
Okay. What about the other tribes?
All right, so on the south side, you had Reuben, Simeon, and Gad.
Okay.
To the west, you had Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin.
Okay.
And then finally on the north side, you had Dan, Asher, and Naphtali.
Wow. So everything was so meticulously planned.
It was very deliberate.
This wasn't just like a
Yeah.
random collection of tents scattered across the desert. It
Mhm.
was a carefully designed representation of their faith and their tribal identities.
Exactly. And I think it really highlights how intertwined their physical world was with their spiritual beliefs.
Yes.
The way they organized their camp reflected their understanding of God's order.
It's fascinating
Yeah.
how it all comes together. We started with those specific duties of the Levites, and now we've zoomed out to see how they fit into this massive, divinely ordained
Yeah.
blueprint for the entire community.
The blueprint for the whole Israelite nation.
It's amazing.
It is.
Okay,
Yeah.
before we move on, I want to pause and just ask you, like, what's resonating with you so far?
Okay.
What's catching your attention in all this talk of roles and responsibilities?
Well, I think what's really fascinating to me is how detailed and organized it all is.
Yeah.
I mean, even as they're wandering in the wilderness,
Right,
constantly on the move,
right,
they're maintaining this really intricate system.
right.
It says a lot about their commitment to order
Absolutely.
and to their faith.
Yeah, I'm struck by how they managed to blend the practical and the spiritual,
Yeah.
right? We're not just seeing their beliefs, we're actually seeing how those beliefs played out
Yeah.
in their everyday lives.
That's right.
And I think it raises a big question about organization in general.
Yeah.
You know, systems, even those rooted in faith,
Mm-hmm.
can be very powerful but also restrictive.
That's true.
It's something to think about as we delve deeper into the lives of these Levites.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Okay, we've laid the groundwork. Let's keep exploring.
Let's do it.
So we've talked about these three families, the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and the Merarites.
Right.
But they didn't all just hang out together, right?
No.
They had specific places where they camped based on their responsibilities.
That's right. Their campsite layout was anything but random.
Okay.
It was very strategic.
I'm already picturing it. Give me the rundown.
All right, so picture the tabernacle as the very heart of the camp, right?
Okay.
Now, the Gershonites, the ones in charge of the coverings and the hangings,
Right.
they camped to the west, directly behind the tabernacle itself.
Oh, okay.
So easy access
Makes sense.
for setting up and packing up.
Right. They were like a mobile stage crew, always ready to raise the curtain on the tabernacle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A good way to put it.
Okay. Where did the Kohathites set up?
All right, so the Kohathites,
They were in charge of all the sacred objects, so I'm guessing prime real estate.
they camped on the south side,
Okay.
a position that was considered to be the most honorable.
Okay.
So their proximity to the holy objects really underscored how important their role was.
Right. Protecting and maintaining them.
Exactly.
Okay. So west for the Gershonites, south for the Kohathites. That leaves the Merarites up north.
Yep.
The heavy lifters with all the structural components.
That's right. The Merarites with those heavy boards and bars, they camped to the north. They were quite literally providing the foundation
Yeah.
for this portable house of worship.
It's brilliant.
It is.
When you think about it,
Yeah.
each family's location was directly tied to what they did.
Uh-huh.
Made everything super efficient.
And speaking of efficiency, there was also a very clear hierarchy within the Levites.
Okay.
So remember Eleazar,
One of Aaron's sons who survived.
that's right.
Right.
Well, he was appointed as the chief over all the Levites.
Okay, so he was like the manager,
He was the manager.
the one responsible for making sure everything ran smoothly.
Yep. Making sure everyone was doing their job.
That's a huge responsibility,
A big job.
especially when you consider how central the Levites were.
Yeah, he needed some serious leadership skills.
Spiritual leadership.
Spiritual leadership, but also organizational skills, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because remember, the smooth operation of this whole setup was considered essential for everyone.
Right, for the spiritual well-being of the entire community.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's revisit this redemption process for those extra firstborn sons.
Okay.
We talked about how there weren't enough Levites to represent every firstborn,
Right.
so they had to symbolically redeem them.
Uh-huh.
Can you break down how that worked?
Sure. So they know there were 22,273 firstborn Israelite males
Okay.
and 22,000 Levites.
Right.
leaving 273 firstborn sons that needed to be accounted for.
Okay.
So for each of those extra sons, a payment of 5 shekels was made.
So it's all about maintaining that balance.
Exactly.
Right, acknowledging the value of each firstborn, even though there isn't a Levite to directly represent them.
That's right.
Okay, and remind me, where did that redemption money go?
Straight to Aaron and his sons.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So again, reinforcing their leadership role.
Yeah, and connecting the priesthood to that whole idea of redemption.
Right, every detail seems to connect to something else.
It does.
It's really building this complex picture of their social and religious structure.
Yeah, and we can't forget that for the Israelites, this wasn't just some random system.
Right, it was divinely ordained.
Divinely ordained. That's the key point.
God chose the Levites, emphasizing that their responsibilities were sacred duties.
Exactly.
Not just tasks.
It wasn't just about keeping things tidy. It was about upholding their covenant with God.
Right, everything they did was an act of service.
Yes, an act of devotion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that brings us to another really fascinating aspect of this chapter.
Okay.
The layout of the entire camp.
The whole Israelite camp.
Yeah.
Right.
We've been focused on the Levites, but they were just one piece of a much bigger picture.
That's right.
So we're zooming out to see how the rest of the tribes fit into this grand campsite design.
Exactly. So imagine the tabernacle
Yeah.
right at the center, representing the presence of God,
Okay.
surrounded by the Levites,
Okay.
and then radiating outwards from that central point,
Mm-hmm.
you have the other 12 tribes of Israel.
I'm picturing like a compass rose, with each tribe occupying a point on the compass.
That's a good way to visualize it.
So how was it all laid out?
Well, the east was considered the most important direction.
Okay.
So that position was occupied by Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun.
Okay.
Those tribes were known for their strength and leadership,
So they were symbolically leading the way as the Israelites journeyed.
exactly like the vanguard of the entire community.
The vanguard, okay, what about the other tribes?
So on the south side, you had Reuben, Simeon, and Gad.
Okay.
To the west, for Manasseh and Benjamin.
Okay.
And finally on the north, you had Dan, Asher, and Naphtali.
Wow, everything was so meticulously planned.
Very deliberate, very organized.
It wasn't just a random collection of tents scattered across the desert.
Nope, not at all.
It was this carefully designed representation of their faith and tribal identities.
That's right. And it highlights how intertwined their physical world was with their spiritual beliefs.
Right.
The way they organized their camp
Yeah.
reflected their understanding of God's order.
It's amazing how it all comes together.
It really is.
We started with those specific duties of the Levites,
Ah.
and now we've zoomed out and we see this massive, divinely ordained blueprint.
Yeah, a blueprint for the whole community.
It's incredible.
It is.
Okay, before we wrap up this epic campsite tour,
Okay.
let me ask, what's the takeaway for us today?
Right.
Why should we care about how a group of people organized themselves in the desert thousands of years ago?
That's a great question. And I think there are a few key takeaways.
Okay.
First, it really highlights the importance of having a clear system in place, even when you're facing a lot of uncertainty.
Right. So whether we're talking about a religious community, a business, or even just our own lives, structure can provide a sense of stability and purpose.
Absolutely. And especially when things get chaotic.
Yeah, when things get tough.
Yeah, having that structure can really help.
Okay, what else?
I think it also underscores the importance of service and the idea that everyone has a role to play.
Right.
The Levites weren't just going through the motions.
Right.
Their service was seen as absolutely crucial to the entire group.
So it's a reminder that we're all connected.
Yeah.
That even seemingly small contributions can have a big impact.
That's right.
And it strengthens the bonds that hold a community together.
Exactly. It really does take a village.
It takes a village, or in this case, a whole tribe dedicated to a common goal.
Exactly.
Okay, is there anything else?
Well, finally, I think it encourages us to examine how our own values shape our actions
Okay.
and influence the structures we create.
Interesting.
Just as the Israelites' faith guided their every move, our own core principles can act as a compass for us.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about ancient history here.
Right.
We're talking about timeless principles.
Timeless principles.
Right, exactly.
The power of organization.
Yeah.
The importance of service.
Yep.
And how our beliefs influence our actions in our communities.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it's all connected. Okay, so listeners, time to do some soul searching.
And see how these ancient lessons might resonate in your modern lives. Okay, so we really unpacked the who, the what, and even the where of the Levites.
Right.
But there's one more piece of this puzzle that I'm really curious about, the why.
Right.
What's the deeper meaning behind all this?
Well, I think that's where we move beyond just the practicalities of organization and into the heart of their belief system.
Okay.
Remember, the Israelites believe that they were in a covenant with God, that they were his chosen people,
Right.
and the tabernacle with all of its rituals and structure represented that covenant.
Right. It was like a physical embodiment of God's presence among them.
Exactly.
So the Levites weren't just caretakers.
Yeah.
They were guardians of this sacred covenant,
Yeah.
this special relationship between the Israelites and God.
That's a good way to put it.
It adds a whole other layer of meaning to their service.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about, keeping things tidy or following rules.
Right.
It was an act of devotion, a way of honoring that commitment to God and maintaining that relationship.
And that idea of redemption that we keep coming back to, the Levites taking the place of the firstborn sons.
Right.
That seems really important too. It's almost like they embody this idea of sacrifice and dedication.
Yeah. They're representing the whole community in their service.
Right.
And I think it also speaks to this concept of communal responsibility.
Okay.
Every Israelite through the Levites was participating in the upkeep of that connection with God.
So it wasn't just the priests or the Levites' burden.
Right,
It was a shared responsibility that helped bind them all together. It takes a village. Well, in this case, a whole tribe.
A whole tribe, yeah.
Dedicated to serving God and maintaining that spiritual well-being.
And that brings us back to your question from earlier.
Okay.
Why should we care about this system today?
Right.
Well, because it reflects, I think, some really universal truths about community, about service, and about how important it is to act in ways that reflect our values.
So even in a secular context, we all have roles to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Whether it's volunteering, helping others, or just treating each other with respect,
Right.
we all contribute to something bigger than ourselves.
And just as the Levites' service was a testament to their faith, our actions reflect our own values and priorities.
That's right. What we invest our time and energy in shows what matters to us.
It's not about blindly following rules or checking boxes.
No.
It's about finding meaning in what we do.
Yeah.
Connecting our efforts to something we believe in.
Exactly.
And that's what makes exploring these ancient texts so valuable.
Yeah.
They offer insights into the human condition that are still relevant today.
Absolutely.
It pushes us to reflect on our own choices and the lives we're building.
That's right.
Numbers. Chapter 3 might seem at first glance like a dry list of names and duties.
Yeah, I can see that.
But we've seen that it's so much more than that.
It is.
It offers a glimpse into the heart of a community, striving to live out their beliefs and find order in the midst of their journey.
And I think it leaves us with a really powerful question.
Okay.
How can we, in our own modern context, embody that spirit of service, dedication, and responsibility that we see in the Levites?
Right.
How do we build systems and structures that reflect our values and contribute to the well-being of our communities?
That's a great question to end on.
Yeah.
We've explored the blueprint now. It's up to all of you listening to go out and build something meaningful with it.
That's right.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.